Good evening, everyone. This is Professor Steckel. How's everybody doing this evening? It looks like we have a good number of people. Just want to make sure, can everybody both hear me and see me? Can I get a thumbs up? Head nod? Okay, good. All right, thanks. Okay, well, we are recording, and I very much look forward to the session this evening. As I mentioned in the announcement, we are going to be going over the Building Great Teams project, and we're going to do as much of the combined weeks 5 and 6 lecture, which has been posted on Blackboard for a little bit. We're going to do as much of that lecture as we can and definitely have time for questions and discussion. I do not, under any circumstances, think we're going to get through that whole lecture, but there's a couple of key pieces I'd like to just bring up and give you all a chance to ask some questions about and all that good stuff. So what I would like to do first is, hold on one second. What I would like to do first is to give you all an opportunity to ask questions and answer some questions about the group project that's coming up. I've already received a number of questions, and there's been some questions that were posted on the discussion board, which I want to try to answer now, and just give everybody an opportunity to ask some additional questions. So first of all, I wanted to, let's see. Oh, I thought I had it up. Okay, well, we'll just walk through. If everybody could pull up the document, Building Great Teams Project Instructions, and have that in front of you, that would be really helpful. And I'd like to just, before I get into the meat of the instructions, I wanted to just turn your attention to the very last page. On page 3, it says submission instructions, and I think understanding what the end product is going to look like may really help you kind of think in your minds and get prepared for how you need to move forward. So first and foremost, I realized when I was looking at this today, I made a slight error that is probably confusing, so I wanted to clarify that. But if everybody could put their phone on mute, that would be great. Thank you. So it says the assignment okay. If you could put your phone on mute or your computer on mute, that would be great. It says the assignment requires the following to be submitted by the deadline posted on Blackboard. That deadline is March 7th at 7 p.m. And it says number 1 is the team report and attachments, and the attachments are actually listed under numbers 2 and 3, so it actually should just say team report. So I did get some questions about how long the report should be and if the attachments were part of that 6-page limit. So I wanted to clarify that the report itself, which is outlined in the rubric, which we'll go over, that is what is a page limit of 6 pages, and that should be submitted in APA format, and the 6 pages for the text only, not the cover page and the reference page. Again, there's some other formatting instructions about margins and 12-point font, double spaced, and all of that typical APA style. You need to use at least 2 external academic references, such as government reports or journal articles, that will be in support of your identification of a community need and the programs and services that you're going to design to meet that community need. The second thing that you'll submit is attachment 1, which is the team strengths profile, and there is both an exemplar and a template on Blackboard for you to use that, or for you to use in support of that. It looks, y'all can see that. It looks like that, and you'll note that there's some initials under the team strengths profile, and those initials should just be whatever your initials are. So it says David P. the next box says David P. That's just an example. So you'll have your name there in it. You'll have a box for each one of your team members, and then you'll just combine them at the top. And if you like, you can just use the initials just so it's clear next to each one of those, but you also don't have to use those. So that's what the MM and KL and KV and all of that is. So you're welcome to do that. And as you noted at the bottom with an asterisk, there you can just put an asterisk next to your top strength in that very top box. And essentially the purpose of this, it really shouldn't take you all very long because you have everybody's strengths now. The purpose of this is so that you can visually see and understand the makeup of your team strengths. It provides a very easy to reference document that looks that helps you really see kind of where the holes are, how appropriately your team really addresses each of the 4 leadership domains that are outlined in the strengths-based leadership text. And so when you've got executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking, you may find that your particular makeup is much more in relationship building and executing, but not very much in influencing and strategic thinking. So that this is really going to form the basis of the whole second half of your report, which addresses things like the rationale for who goes in which positions and kind of where the holes in your team are. So really ultimately, when you think about implementing a complex project, which is essentially what you all are being asked to do, there's room for pretty much every kind of skill, and maybe not every kind, but most kinds. And so you should really think about having a very balanced team. Like in the exemplar, you can see it's very, for the most part, it's very evenly distributed. And the strengths that are listed here are actually the strengths that were from a team that I built and put together specifically based on strengths. And I hired a couple of team members in order to fill the gaps on my team. And so this is actually a very real life example that you all can use. And just think about really making sure that if you are playing to somebody's strengths, you're gonna get better performance out of that individual person and out of the team, especially if the team is balanced and it's balanced in such a way that supports the work that you really are needing to do. So that's really the goal just for this one particular sheet. And I'll stop right there for a minute. Are there any immediate questions about the team strengths profile? Okay. So moving on to the second attachment, attachment 2, job descriptions. Again, there's another template and an exemplar on Blackboard under the assignments tab. And the goal here is that you all are broken up into groups of, I think mostly 5, but in some cases maybe 4. And so you are going to be required to have a team of at least 7 positions, but no more than 9. And those positions you're going to have to design specifically to support the programs and services that you're designing to meet your community need. So there are intentionally gaps in the number of positions that you have. So you've got your team of 4 to 5. You can work together in your group to figure out, what positions do you need, and then who on your team is going to fill each of those positions. And then you're going to have to figure out what additional positions do you need to have, and then you'll write those job descriptions for each one of those positions. And then lastly, and we'll talk about the rationale and stuff a little more in just a second, And then lastly, you're required to submit individually a group contribution statement, and I will be posting within the next week just a very simple format. It doesn't have to be an APA format or anything like that, but I'm going to post some simple, easy to answer questions and just an outline for you to follow. I'll be posting that under the assignments tab as well. And that's also referenced in the syllabus, and that's just simply a way for me to understand how individuals were contributing to the overall group process. And because it's a group project, but you're being graded individually. So that's an opportunity for me to just look for things like consistency across, what people say and what the overall individual contributions to the group project were. So once I post the instructions, if you have any further questions about that, please let me know. And so we can go ahead and move on to the overall report outline. And I think there's a couple of questions that were posted, if I can figure out how to read them. Okay. Okay, somebody said they can't hear me. Can y'all hear me? Can I get a yes? You can hear me? Okay, all right. That's what I thought. Okay. Okay, so there's a question in the paper, will we submit a chart? No, the chart will not be in the paper. You can just reference the chart. You can call it Appendix A, or actually you'll call it Attachment 2 or Attachment 1. And so you can reference it, but you don't need to take up space of your 6-page limit using that chart. That's why it's an attachment. And then the next question is, also for the analysis part of the strengths, will this need to be in paragraph form? Will we do like a SWOT analysis? It's not really a SWOT analysis. That's later on. It's really, if you follow the rubric and you answer all the questions in the rubric in APA format, which is of course paragraph form, then you will you will have answered all of the questions that you need to answer. Okay. Does that answer that one particular question? Hopefully so. Okay, are there any other questions before we go to kind of getting into a little more detail? Okay. All right. So if you all will turn to the next, you can read this in the instructions, but I think it'll make more sense to turn to the next document that says Building Great Teams Project, the grading rubric. So if you could put that in front of you. So really the overall purpose of this project, as I've kind of alluded to, is that you really, is someone talking? Okay. The overall purpose of this assignment is to figure out how to leverage your group strengths in a real world scenario. So as social workers, you're going to be faced with all kinds of, new challenges, new opportunities. And this particular scenario is a very realistic scenario. It's one that I've been a part of many, many times. Is all of a sudden you get some funding, or your agency gets a new contract and they say, okay, we've got to, apply for this grant, or we've got to do this, we've got to do that. And so it's a very realistic thing that you may be asked to do at some point or participate in some way. And so I've tried to make it as simple as possible. And I think that because it seems like a lot of stuff, or that it may be things that are unfamiliar to you, it may feel somewhat overwhelming, or you may have a tendency to overanalyze or overthink it. And so I wanted to tell you right up front, it's actually meant to be very simple, even though it seems complicated. So I wanted to break down each of the components to hopefully allay any anxiety or fear that you all may be having about this. And also, it's actually supposed to be really an opportunity for you to be creative and think outside the box and really have some fun working in your teams, and really, because who doesn't want to talk about their strengths and talk about how to leverage those. And again, it's really is a very realistic example. And so I think at the end of this, you all will be better prepared to handle situations like this in the future. And as an aside, the job description formats, those are actually what's required by the Department of Health and Human Services at the federal level, specifically SAMHSA, in their federal grant requirements. So that's a very realistic thing to be asked to do out in the field. Okay, so I'm going to start on the rubric under the first component, which says identify the need in the community your agency will work to address. Actually, you know what? I'm going to back up a second. And so in the instructions, I've essentially set a context for you, which is that, you work for a nonprofit organization, you've been given $1 million, and your CEO, the head of your organization, has said, we need to understand whether our organization wants to apply for this funding. And so you're essentially writing a report so that the head administrators at your agency can make an informed decision about whether or not to take the time or to understand whether they would really be eligible to apply for this funding. So again, this is a very realistic thing that agencies have to deal with every day. So the report outline is, again, what is going to need to be submitted in APA format, and that's the thing that has a 6-page limit. And so that takes us back to the rubric. So the first thing in identifying the community need, this is really part of the reason why I tried to I'm trying to remember if I set up your group by, I have so many classes, I apologize. I'm trying to remember if I divided you up by time zone or by interest level. I think it was just by time zone. So you all as a team will have an opportunity to work together to identify a community need that you want to do a little bit of research on. This could be homelessness, teen pregnancy, sex trafficking, child abuse, anything that your team is particularly interested in. Or it could be something that your agency that you work at or an agency that you're interning at is already, working for. So using the information that you see every day at your individual agencies is perfectly acceptable to help get the creative juices flowing for figuring out how to address a community need. So really, when you talk about a community need for your agency, every nonprofit or government agency, they're working towards a mission, and generally that mission is to alleviate or address some kind of community need. And there's always, well, not always, but generally speaking, we hope that there's evidence and documentation of that community need. So you're going to have to do some research and figure out. So if you say you want to address homelessness in Middle Tennessee, then you need to go and get data on the number of homeless people we have in Middle Tennessee and just some of the characteristics and demographics of that population, where are they located, what are the situations, and that kind of thing. So it's pretty straightforward overview. And it also has to be realistic. That's why I put $1 million. So with $1 million, you're not going to, cure cancer or send people to the moon or anything like that. So it does have to be somewhat realistic with that as well. Then the second part, item B, under the first component, overview of program or services needed to address the community need. And it asks you to include a description of an evidence-based service. You all are either, whether you're organization or MLCP or evidence-based practice, interpersonal evidence-based practice, EBIP, whatever it's called, whichever track that you're on in this program, you need to be aware of evidence-based services. So whether they're kind of a more macro service or a more micro service, there are evidence-based practices out there. So you need to do some research on what is a realistic program or service that is out there and has some research behind it to help address the community need that you've identified. So for some people, it may actually be easier to think of the community need secondarily to the service. You may be more interested in the program or service, and then you can figure out, okay, well, let's look at this community need because we know about this program or service. And again, that's really what the $1 million is going to pay for. It's going to pay for the services, and it's going to pay for all of the different positions that you all are looking at. The rest of this is really just pretty straightforward. You need to talk about the target population that the program is going to serve, and the service delivery setting, like is it in-home or clinic-based or community-based. So really that's just a basic overview of the community need and what services you're going to provide. And the reason that I'm asking you all to do this is twofold. First, it's really important as social workers to understand and go through a process. So this is really a learning opportunity for you all to figure out, what is a community need and what do we have to do to address it. So it's pretty straightforward like that. There was also a assignment that used to be in your intro to social work class that was essentially this about identifying community needs and figuring out how to address it. And that is no longer in that course. And so I thought it'd be really helpful to kind of integrate it into this assignment. And in addition to that, when you really talk about your team strengths and figuring out, okay, what positions are you going to have, and really in order to make that part of the exercise make sense, you have to have something you have to have a skeleton to kind of hang that meat on. And so, so that's really why you're asked to do that piece as well. The next part is about the capacity of your organization. And this is really about answering some very specific question about your agency. So again, it may be helpful to use an agency that you work for or that you can do some research on. Most agencies, especially nonprofit and government agencies, they have a lot of information available on their websites. And so you can do research that way to help answer some of these questions. But again, you're welcome to use your own agencies where you're interning or working. So you want to talk about experience and expertise. So, kind of what capacity do you have and what experience, why would somebody want to fund your organization? They're going to want to see that you have experience, serving people who are homeless or serving victims of domestic violence. So funders, foundations, and government agencies that give out funds for services don't typically want to fund startup companies or agencies that don't have a lot of demonstrated experience in things. And so it's going to be really helpful for you to figure out how to talk about that. You also want to talk about relationships within the community. When we get into the lecture, that will make a little bit more sense about community collaboration and coalition building. And if you are trying to meet a community need, rarely can one agency do that. So it's going to be important to demonstrate that you have existing relationships within the community as it relates to the particular need that you're trying to address. And lastly, you want to talk about available resources, both personnel and or human resources and financial resources necessary to successfully achieve grant goals. This may be a little bit harder for you to find, but essentially this is a hypothetical case study. So if you are not able to find the exact resources, or you're welcome to essentially make up an ABC nonprofit, XYZ nonprofit. So you may kind of have to answer this particular part of the question with information that you essentially are creative about and make up, and that's perfectly fine. It just has to make sense. However, if you are using an existing agency, so you're using the agency that you work for, then you're absolutely you can't make up anything. Then you should be able to ask about their human resources, ask about their financial resources, and then cite your sources for all of that information. So I'm going to stop there for a quick second. Are there any questions about? I'm kind of running through it pretty quickly, but questions? You can unmute yourself or put it in chat. Okay, move on to the next one. The next part of this is you have to outline 5 goals your agency will achieve to address your identified community need. And these goals need to be written in a SMART format. And I've put some tip sheets just today. So if you haven't looked in a little while, please go back on Blackboard and look under the project tab. And there's some more resources about writing SMART goals. SMART goals is something that you're really never going to get away from in this program. You're going to be asked to do this in some way, shape, or form in most of your classes. So if this is your first time seeing this, just know that it's not a one-time thing, and you will definitely see it, especially if you're a clinician. You will see this moving forward. So again, there's some tip sheets about that, and that should be pretty straightforward moving forward. The tip sheets are pretty clear. Okay. The next one is your team strengths profile. And so you use the template and you use it as an attachment, but that's just a visual. So this is the part where you really provide a rationale for, or wait, hold on. So you have to just kind of give an overview of the team and include an analysis of the strengths of your current team makeup and any gaps that are relevant to your team's capacity to successfully implement your grant goals. So if your grant goals are if part of your grant goals are to provide community outreach, for example, you are going to want to sift through all of the strengths of your team members and understand whether or not you have the capacity to have a staff person who's going to really excel at community outreach. If your services are to provide clinical services, then you really need to be looking at strengths more related to relationship building and empathy, and also execution, because usually there's so much paperwork involved with clinical services. So really, this is an opportunity for you to really dig deep and take a deeper dive with the StrengthsFinder assessments for each of you, and really look at it collectively as a team and figure out what are you going to be good at and where are your gaps going to be. So you're really going to have to thoroughly read and understand the individual reports for each one of your team members, and really try to overlay, I have really strong empathy skills, or you are really good at strategic thinking, so you may be better at more of a leadership position where you have to think about, okay, how are we going to be, meeting our grant deliverables and things like that. So there's, you have a lot of flexibility, and I think once you kind of lay out all of the pieces of this puzzle, essentially, you should be able to figure out and provide a thorough analysis of the strengths and limitations of your existing team. So again, this is a place where you will reference the team strengths profile attachment, but you don't have to actually put that chart within the text of your report. I'm just looking about questions. The question says, I just want to confirm if we can make up information about our agency and do not need to use an existing nonprofit as a framework. Is that correct? So if you talk about the capacity of an organization and you're making up the organization, so it's ABC nonprofit, then that's not an organization that exists. So therefore, you're going to have to essentially make up all of the components, and you're not going to have a lot to reference unless you want. But I would recommend that it's not just completely made up, that you use do some research as a guide. But if you use an existing agency that's where you work or where you formerly worked, then you're going to have to really do the research and not make up something about an agency. That just wouldn't be appropriate. So hopefully that answers that question. Okay. The next part is about providing a list of the required positions. And again, at a minimum, this is 7. And you are need to answer the questions about that are outlined here in the rubric. So the first one is, who from your current team will fill each required position? So you're going to have to list out the seven positions and then list who is going to fill that position. So that's going to be just a pretty straightforward, paragraph saying, this is, position one, and then the name, and as long as it's an APA format, you can make it look just however it makes sense for your project to look. You also need to provide a detailed rationale for why each team member's strengths, experience, and professional competencies are an appropriate fit for that position. I did receive a question about what was meant by professional competencies. There is some reference to some professional competencies in the exemplar job descriptions, but also it's just kind of a general term. So if one of your goals is to provide a certain kind of clinical service or a certain evidence-based practice, and you have two team members or one team member who has already been trained in that particular model, then that would be a professional competency that you would make reference to. So that's a very general term that just has to do with, very kind of concrete, specific competencies that you have. So there's competencies are slightly different than strengths. So somebody, say for example, who's very proficient at Excel and has experience doing budgets, you could, describe that as a professional competency. So really, this is an opportunity again for you to dig deep into the makeup of your particular team and figure out what is going to be appropriate. Who's gonna fill which position and what that needs to look like. So when I say rationale, this is kind of where you make your case. This is really where you make your argument for, this is why, Jordan is going to be really good at at being the project director. He has leadership experience, and he's overseen, grant projects before, or he's managed staff before. And so that's why he is going to be the best, project director or project coordinator for this particular thing. Or, Faith has really strong empathy skills, and she has lots of experience working with, one-on-one with clients and families. And so we really want her in a direct service position, and this is why. And then, of course, you want to overlay all of the strengths from your strengths assessment into that, which those reports are, you all have read them. They're extremely detailed. And so you should be able to find find some information in there that will really help you understand, if the job description, says this, then we need to match our strengths, and they really need to make sense. You need to overlay that job description onto those strengths in such a way that it really makes sense. Because that really is what you're going to be, is what's going to make you most effective long-term. So I have a note here about the type, or just some examples for job descriptions. This is not I tried to have at least 7 on here. I think I have a few more than 7, but these are sort of typical jobs in an agency, but there's also many other jobs that you all may be aware of that are not on this list, and that's perfectly fine. It just has to be relevant and make sense for your particular program or service and your particular community need. Okay, and then lastly, and then I'll stop again for questions. I have a section here that is really critically important, and this is really another section where you're gonna, section where you're gonna talk about your identified gaps. And this is the part where, okay, so you've got your team of 5, and you know how it's gonna look, and you know which positions your team of, each of those 5 team members are gonna have. You have to fill 2 other positions, or you have 3 other positions or 4 other positions that need to be filled. You need to explain, because you're going to have to write job descriptions for all of those positions. You're going to have to explain why those why you don't kind of currently have the right people on your team to fill those positions, and what kind of strengths and other qualifications are going to be needed for each of those positions. So you're going to have an opportunity to talk about the job duties and qualifications on the actual job descriptions, and that's really important that you fill them out, and they're only one page, and you answer that piece. But under this section, as it's outlined in the rubric, this is what's in the report outline, and you're going to be writing in paragraph format, in APA format, answering all of these questions. So this is an opportunity, again, to provide some further analysis about your strengths and your limitations that are needed for those other positions that need to be filled. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's any other questions. And so again, the analysis, as I've said, needs to be part of the 6 pages in the text. Think of it, it's a report. So the report is gonna be written as an academic paper in APA format.
I have a question.
Sure.
This is Kara.
Hey, Kara.
Basically, for our group, how we kind of did is we came up with the idea and we threw out the positions that we thought we needed for this job that we wanted, this need that we thought we had. Mm-hmm. We didn't really talk about like specifics of what their job description should do. That was pretty much left up to the person that's going to do that assignment, which is me. So okay. So with that being said, I guess that's what my question is because we didn't really say, we just kind of threw out some ideas, but we didn't really say what their job entailed. Mm-hmm. So is it okay for me to like Google job descriptions and pull ideas from here and there to piece together?
Yeah, and that's a really, really good question, Kara. And obviously you don't want to just cut and paste, especially if you have a case manager or a project director or whatever the exemplar ones. You don't want to just cut and paste what I've had there. But what I have there is a really good example of just kind of a typical job description. It doesn't necessarily have to have 8 bullets of job duties, but this is really the part where you as a team demonstrate to me that you can think critically about what you have to do. So if you're going to provide case management services, then yeah, you should Google, there's all kind, you can look on the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services website. They have a whole protocol for case management. The Bureau of TennCare or any Medicaid office in your state is going to have information about, requirements for case management services. And when you research the information about the evidence-based practice that you're going to use, there should be some general information about what that service is, who can provide it. So for example, if you're going to provide child-parent psychotherapy, so PC or parent-child interaction therapy, so PCIT, that's an intense, clinical model for young children. And so you have to receive the training for that. You have to have a certain educational background for that. And there should be some typical examples of what that service actually looks like. And so those are the details that you will provide in that job description. And some of them can be more general. So if you have a supervisor, like a kind of a generic clinical supervisor, then there's some things that, you're always going to want to have. You're going to want to have your weekly or biweekly supervision. You're going to individual supervision. You're going to want to have group supervision. You're going to need to do chart audits. And so those are things that you can, interview your own clinical supervisor, interview other people, ask some questions. But really, I think it is appropriate to do some research within your individual agency or online to figure out what really, what kind of specific job duties would be included in that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. One more question.
Sure.
When I do the part to where I figure out which team member fits what position,
Mm-hmm.
can they, or can we as team members, could we kind of fluff ourselves up and say we've taken a training and we haven't? Is it like that pretend, or this needs to be actual
I
factual?
It's no, no. That's a really, really good question, and I know it's kind of confusing because I'm asking you to make up certain things. But because you're going to be talking about yourself, I wouldn't I wouldn't make anything up. I think that you can talk in terms of potentiality. You can say, you know, because you have attended this previous training or because you've worked at this place for a year, that then means that you believe you're ready to do this. So, I mean, you can in some ways sort of give yourself a promotion, if that makes sense, but then you're going to have to justify it in your rationale. And I'm going to be, as someone who's going to be reviewing these and grading these, I'm going to be, especially with, my background and experience in management, I'm going to be thinking critically about, is this realistic? Because one of the worst things for a team is to kind of put somebody in an elevated position a little bit too early when they're just not quite ready. You always want to sort of push somebody as much as you can, but it's you definitely want to not make up things about yourself or make up that you've attended a training. You can say things like in your a rationale, you're free to be creative with that. And the kind of key thing I'm going to be looking for is critical thinking, is does it make sense? So you're going to want to say, somewhere, if you're doing an evidence-based practice and you don't have anybody on your team who's been trained in that particular practice, then at some point part of your rationale is going to say, these two people are going to be our service providers, and we're going to ensure that they're immediately trained. Or you need to say, we need to hire two people who have been trained in this particular evidence-based practice. So it's really one of those things I'm really asking you to really think critically about how this could look.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
A quick one.
Sure.
This is Stephen. So on the the specific jobs, there was no really clear way to assign the strengths to the jobs other than to look at them and just look at the qualities that each strength pertain to and sort of make a judgment. That's the way the process should look? That's
one way to do it. I want to make sure I'm understanding your question. You have an opportunity, just depending on just how your team process needs to look. You can start with your services and figure out what are the positions that you're going to need in those services, and then overlay your strengths onto the job descriptions needed for each one of those positions. Or you can start with your team strengths and say, you know what, we have a lot of kind of more macro oriented people on our team. That's just how how things sort of shook out. So let's make sure that we pick an evidence-based practice that's more macro related and has to do with, developing policy or advocacy or, management or, something along or leadership, something along those lines, as opposed to something that's more direct services. So you have an option to kind of do it either way, or both ways somehow, and kind of meet in the middle. So I would say it really is up to your team. I don't want to prescribe that process for you, but I would recommend that you investigate both ways and kind of see which way is perhaps easiest.
Okay.
Does that
sounds
make
good?
sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Great questions.
I wrote to you in the comments. I don't know if you wanted me to repeat the question.
Oh, yes. Would you mind?
I just wondered I wasn't sure whether you had done this project before with students, but I was wondering if you've seen kind of pitfalls students run into. I know you've discussed some of those, but
Yes.
maybe shortcomings you've seen with projects in the past.
Sure. That's a great question. I love it when people start from the, what do I not need to do? So I would say, and this goes for my class, this goes for any class, and I think I said it last time, is really, really, really follow the rubric. If it's not in the rubric, you probably don't need it unless it really adds to it. But really make sure that you answer every single question that's in the rubric, because I'm going to be going down. As you can see, there's point values for each component. And so I'm going to be assigning your grades on how well you answered those questions. So that's number one in terms of pitfalls, is don't go off track. I'm kind of telling you how to get from New York to Los Angeles, or that you need to get from New York to Los Angeles, and you're going to tell me how, how you're going to get there. So don't try to go to Canada. And also what I would say is just kind of reinforcing the creativity and critical thinking components of this, is that really you all are coming at this from probably very varying degrees of experience. So depending on your individual backgrounds, your educational backgrounds, some of this may make more sense to some students than other students. So I would say this is a group project. I know that we have a tendency to want to kind of give this section to this person and give this section to that person. I'm going to say it's going to be really difficult for you to do this project effectively without having at least a few group conversations where you can really provide kind of a seamless understanding of kind of how this needs to look. It really should, you all should be meeting by Zoom. You should be having conference calls. If you're in the same sort of area, you can meet in person. But it really is meant to be like a fully integrated group process. That being said, I know some people are stronger writers and some people are better at formatting or editing. And so, I'm not saying don't divvy up the task and delegate, because of course you're going to need to do that. But I would hope that you did that after really talking together as a group. I think that'll make more sense. I think that'll make it easier, especially when, people know themselves. So you're going to want to hear from your group members, these are my strengths and I really think that I could do this position, as opposed to someone independently saying, oh, I think based on these 4 things that they could do this. So I would hope that you would really have a meaningful dialogue about that in your groups, because that's how it's going to look like. Hopefully in an ideal work situation, that would be how that process would go in a realistic environment.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Good question. I had some other questions via email. I want to make sure I answered those. Okay. I think I did. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Lastly, on the rubric, you will be graded for just, writing style. And that's another thing is pitfalls to avoid is, especially when you break up a, assignment or a paper, or you give certain sections, people can write in different voices because we all have a different voice in writing. And so I would definitely take the time to go through and try to make your writing as seamless as possible. And so it really is in one voice. And of course, check for any kind of grammatical errors and typos and things like that, because you have 10% of your grade essentially that's not content related. That's actually about, clarity and just writing style and following instructions in APA format and that kind of thing. So 10% can definitely be the difference between an A and a B. And so I recommend that you take the time to proofread and edit and all that good stuff. Okay. Wow. About 50 minutes on instructions. So I thank you for listening. I definitely wanted to take the time. I know this is a little bit of a meaty project. It's an important project. I really, at the end of the day, I hope that you really have fun with this and that it's a creative and interesting opportunity. I definitely am hoping that it stretches your brains in different directions that you may not be used to, but that at the end of the day, you really will have accomplished something pretty cool. And also just don't overthink it. Just try to kind of move down the rubric, move down the line, and answer the questions. And as you're getting into it, if you have any other questions, I'm going to try to check the discussion board a little more often. Sometimes it just honestly escapes my mind, and I apologize for not being very timely if it takes me more than 2 days to respond to your questions. But please, continue to email me or post on the discussion board. So any other last questions about that project or any other assignment related questions before we dive into the lecture a little bit? Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you all see the PowerPoint? I can't really see any of y'all. Can I get a head nod? Can you see the PowerPoint? Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so everybody should have access to this. It's very long. I think it's about 84 slides. So just as a little intro about this, interagency collaboration is really one of my areas of passion. It is an area that I definitely needed to get well versed in my last many jobs with the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services here in Tennessee. And I really, I've done a lot of work with some national experts in this area. And so this presentation that you see here is a combination of many years of work and consultation with those folks, and ultimately a collaborative effort that came to fruition called the Tennessee Collaboration Guild. And there's, I just wanted to turn your attention to the very last slide. I'm not going to go to it right now because it would take too long, but y'all can look at it. So there's some websites and some contact information of some folks if you are especially interested in this area and you want to dive deeper. There's an additional resources tab that I've added on Blackboard on the left-hand side of the page that there's 2 documents about additional leadership bibliographies and collaboration and conflict bibliographies. So there's some other resources there that you all can look up if you're especially interested in this topic. So I'm going to kind of skip through this a little bit. So essentially, collaboration, what we've seen is it's really important that you all know how to effectively collaborate at all levels of social work practice. So I think it's really appropriate to talk about this in a foundation leadership and organizational management course, because whether you're going to be going into micro level work at the clinical level or macro level work at government or policy levels, you are going to have to collaborate. You are going to have to work with other human beings and across agencies, especially if you're working in things like integrated care settings or on interdisciplinary teams where you have to work with nurses and doctors and pharmacists and educators and government officials. Understanding effective ways to work with other people is critically important. Just like it is when I'm asking you to look at this building great teams project and thinking about, internally in a intra-agency setting, when you're working within your agency, those team dynamics and building on strengths is really important. It's equally as important figuring out how to work across systems. And at the micro level, at the clinical practice level, when you are working with a client, an adult, a family, a child, you don't do for those people. If you are doing for those clients, then you're not really doing effective or appropriate social work. You are responsible for working with those clients. And that is a level of collaboration, and why things like, motivational interviewing skills and empathy and communication, things like that become really, really important. Because at the end of the day, it's about them. It's not about you. So understanding how you show up in these different settings, whether it's at whatever level of practice that you are, it's critically important. And I have a note here about system change requiring collaboration at all practice levels. So when we think about just even taking the behavioral health field, for example, when there's a system change at that level, so say legislation is passed and a policy gets instituted and funding comes down from either the state government or the federal government, it will trickle down to the practice level. And all of those changes that have to happen, they're going to happen better and more effectively if they're done in a collaborative way. So we're going to talk about what that looks like a little bit. Okay. So again, just kind of touching on the importance of effective collaboration, kind of why I thought it was really relevant to bring this up at this phase of this course is social workers, and the blog for this week really talked about this a lot, these VUCA systems. And so when you're working with vulnerable populations, oppressed populations, and oftentimes you're working in settings that are at, I would characterize them at high risk. So if you're at a nonprofit agency, some piece of legislation could come down, or they could have an audit finding, or something could happen, you never know, and they could lose funding. And that really can be a very uncertain or potentially volatile environment that you're working in. Some things are very political or very controversial, and so it can be a very stressful environment in which you're working. And so figuring out effective and meaningful ways to work with other people are going to help you kind of weather those storms in a better way. Additionally, when you work in environments that are complex, which pretty much most social work, just the nature of our work, is going to be complex. Collaboration is important there too. And additionally, things, and this may be more often than the other three, can be very ambiguous. I'm asking you for this Building Great Teams project to write job descriptions, but at the same time, how many times have you as an individual walked into a job and just said, hey, we need you to go do this, but they don't tell you how, and they don't tell you when, and they don't really tell you, kind of give you clear instructions and expectations for how you're supposed to do your job. Ideally, that's not what we want you to do. That's kind of part of what this project is about, to show you the importance of things like job descriptions and mutually understood expectations and things like that. But oftentimes you work in these very ambiguous settings. You may get funding for a project, and then the funder doesn't really tell you what the expectations are. So all of these different environments, really understanding some of these kind of core skills can help you better navigate some of these competing priorities and some of these different issues that you have to kind of deal with. So collaboration is one of those words that it's a little bit jargony, and it's one of the things in my past work, kind of why we really started the Tennessee Collaboration Guild, and why I felt as the director we really needed some help in this area, is that we had these heavy interagency responsibilities that we were working on, and everybody thought that they were doing a good job. And of course, everybody was trying very hard. And they said, oh, we're collaborating. And collaboration was actually a requirement of our funding. But what I realized pretty quickly is that people weren't really collaborating. They thought they were, but they really weren't. And so I sought out some expert advice on really, what is a good working definition of collaboration. And so I love this slide for a variety of reasons, but as you can tell, it's pretty simple, but it's also pretty challenging. And so this is an opportunity for you to think about the agencies that you're currently working in or currently interning in, and figure out, how do they work with other agencies? Because essentially, and again, going back to the Building Teams project, if you can't be one agency trying to address a community need. I mean, obviously that happens a lot, but you're going to do better if you're working with other agencies who are addressing other parts of that need, especially if you work in a collective impact kind of initiative. And so looking at the definition for this, there's some alternatives for working with other agencies. Sometimes you don't necessarily need to collaborate. Sometimes you can just communicate, and that's good enough. So there's also some discernment that you're going to need to figure out, what is the best approach to, working with this other team. Or say you're on a community coalition and you're trying to, I keep on using homelessness. We'll just go with that. You're trying to end homelessness. You're going to want to work with a lot of different agencies, and so you're going to need to figure out, okay, can we just communicate? So that means we're entities that are aware and we share some information. So we know we're kind of all working towards this goal, and we may meet once a year and share the results of the piece of this particular puzzle that we're working on. But more often than not, it's going to be more effective use of resources and everybody's time if you are going to at least want to coordinate. So your entities or agencies are aware, you share information, and you participate in joint processes. So maybe you work together to define 6-month to 3-year goals that you all work on towards ending homelessness in your community, and you make some action steps based on that. So, agency A is going to work on this piece, agency B is going to work on this piece, agency 3 is going to work on that piece, and then you're all going to come together and collectively look to see, how good a job you're doing and all of that kind of stuff. So you're really going to have to share some information, but also participate in some joint processes in order to make that really effective. And kind of the most intense, at least for the purposes of our conversation, way to work in an interagency environment is to fully collaborate. And that's really where entities are aware, share information, participate in joint processes, but they're also doing things like co-creating policies and procedures and sharing resources and ownership. And that's really the basis of the rest of what we're going to have time to talk about today. Is really these pieces, if we're working so closely together that we are, defining goals, defining expectations that are going to be implemented across agencies, if we are going to be working together to create policies and procedures that are effective across agencies and share resources and ownership, maybe saying, you know what, not only am I going to work on this project with you, but my agency is going to pay for 20% of this piece, and your agency is going to pay for 30% of this piece. And collectively, we're going to be able to really achieve some big goals. Everybody has ownership in that kind of environment, but there's huge opportunity for some amazing, important work to be done. And I mean, in Tennessee, for example, work around adverse childhood experiences is being done and having amazing results. with just at least to the degree that we're all getting on the same page, and doing things like sharing information, sharing resources, and definitely all having accountability and ownership for different pieces of the pie. So there's elements of this when you actually are collaborating that we're going to talk about that are, there are ways to do that where things can go really, really well. And there's ways to do that where things can go very, very poorly. And I've seen in my experience, things go both ways. So moving forward, collaboration is as much about where you are going as how you get there. And this is where I could potentially divert the conversation and get into conversations around mindfulness and things like that. But really, what we talk about is there's a difference between being collaborative and doing collaborative work. So really, when we talk about, this idea is really building on a lot of the work that you all did in your leadership self-assessments, where I asked you to really be aware and take stock of, your strengths and what is working well and what your limitations are. That level of self-awareness really needs to translate into action when you are working with other people. And honestly, that's true for whether you're working on an interdisciplinary team or an intra-agency team and any other kind of interagency group that's more of a kind of a coalition or a work group or things like that. Is our ability to work effectively in partnership with others is based as much on who we are committed to being in that relationship as it is on what we will be doing in our work. And as you all reflect on your strengths-based leadership domains around execution and relationship building, you may realize that this is a real, being versus doing is a real struggle, for a lot of people. Some people, go to meetings and they like to, be social and, network and talk with people and ask about people's kids and things like that. And other people are very focused on the doing aspect, and they are kind of more executors and kind of task masters and really want to, walk down that agenda and, okay, we've got these boxes to check and we've got to get all these things done. And there's nothing, neither one is inherently wrong, but both are equally as important. And there is really this opportunity to really strike a balance that's going to be most effective. That's really the goal, because expectations about collaboration can be inherently unclear. And so you've got these, as I said, sometimes you're working in these uncertain and ambiguous environments. And so if you've got, you've got this big agenda that's come down, and your agency is going to work on, their mission, and they're going to collaborate across agencies to do that. At some point, you have to figure out, what is everybody going to do, and how are we going to get there, and what does it look like getting there? And so many times people just focus on the do, and agencies just focus on the do, and they don't focus on how exactly are we going to be in this relationship. What are the expectations? What is our purpose? How do we want to share information? How do we want to share resources? And so that's essentially kind of the context in which we're working is kind of the being, and it needs to be balanced with the doing, which is the what. And the why is kind of underneath all of that. And so it's really important that you find a balance in the being versus doing. So I'm going to roll along here. So the rest of this lecture kind of goes into, part 2 is about principles of effective collaboration. Part 3 is about some structured conversations, and part 4 is some kind of more concrete skills that you can do. But really figuring out, like, before you even take your first step, when you're getting started, figuring out, what are we committed as a group collectively? What are we committed to doing in this relationship? And who are we committed to being in this relationship are 2 critical questions that, if not answered, are gonna really create some pitfalls pretty quickly, and your group is going to get derailed, potentially start a lot of infighting, and just simply not be as effective as it could be. So really looking at some basic questions around, when are we going to meet and for how long? Who is going to participate in this effort? Is someone in charge or leading the work? Sometimes that's actually a very unclear question. Obviously, is someone bringing food? How are we going to eat? What's going to motivate us to continue to meet together to work on this important work? So some of this may seem really obvious, common sense. I hope so. But you may be surprised, and if you've kind of been around, you may not be so surprised, but there are so many times where groups get together and they don't ever ask these questions. They just get so focused on the work and the agenda and checking off the boxes that they don't just take the time to stop, pause, breathe, and ask some really important questions about, what are we really doing, and who are we committed to being in this relationship? How we're on a journey together. Let's talk about how we're going to get there. So I don't have time to kind of go through all of these, so I'm going to highlight a couple of these. You can read through them. There's also, if you look in the notes, there's some pretty extensive notes on this page if you look in the instructor view of this. But this is a key one. So principle 1, when you're in a healthy collaborative environment, there is a commitment to mutual purpose and mutual benefit. Where there really are 3 fundamental conclusions. The first of which is there will be value added to the outcome if we engage the challenge collaboratively. And this goes back to that kind of that dashboard, that orange dashboard that talked about coexisting communication all the way through collaboration. You have to discern, on what level you need to work together. So asking the question or concluding that there is value added to the outcome if we engage the challenge collaboratively is part of that conversation. There's also agreement as to the relationship between stakeholders in pursuit of this goal, and you have acknowledged the complexity of the task. So this is really understanding, taking a 360 view of the overall project and what you're meant to be doing. And really, again, who you're committed to being and how you want to be in a relationship to stakeholders. Oftentimes, and I've worked in a lot of these environments, they're adversarial. There's conflict. There's disagreement. There's discord. There's bad blood. But yet, because of your position or because of your agency or, whatever the issue is, you kind of have to work with these groups. I mean, sometimes it's a quote unquote kind of arranged marriage, so to speak. And, you're kind of forced together. And if you don't really figure out what you want that relationship to look like and what it really needs to look like in order to be healthy, you can again get derailed really, really quickly. And oftentimes, as in social work settings, the tasks that you're asked to do are really complex. So principle 2, it is a space that holds me, you, and we. So essentially understanding that in a collaborative environment, there is me and my agency and my perspective and my agenda where I come from and my needs and my contributions and strengths and limitations. And there's yours. But when we work together collaboratively, all of that really has to coalesce. And we have to understand that, just because that one, if we work collaboratively, we become a we, because again, we're sharing resources, we're sharing ownership, we're sharing accountability. But we never stop being me, and you never stop being you. So sometimes I think so much conflict when we work across agencies comes when, I have my mission and you have your mission, and the work becomes about me undercutting your mission and trying to bring your organization over to my side and to get you to work the way that I want you to work, because, my mission is so good and so important. And really, it's important to kind of take a step back and realize that we probably have more common ground than we think, and really focusing on what we have in common and where our missions overlap is going to be a lot more effective than just trying to argue back and forth and and just kind of doing this me versus you, instead of this understanding that there really is a we. Okay. There's some activities here. We obviously don't have time tonight to do them, but these can be really handy for you to do in the field if you find yourself working in situations in any kind of group setting. It can be really important to kind of stop and take some time and figure out, okay, where are we really coming from? And this frame activity is a good way to realize that essentially the outcome of this activity is understanding we all have a different perspective, we all have a different worldview, and we have a lot of different agendas, both organizationally and individually, and personally and professionally, that are represented every single time we walk into a room. And understanding that about ourselves, so that goes back to that self-awareness and self-management, you can really understand that every single person that's sitting around that table with you has all of those same individual and organizational interests that you do. They just may look different or be different, because obviously, they're different. So that's important to remember. Shared learning is a shared value. I'm going to have to kind of move through some of this. Principle 4, collaboration is an intentional process and is worth protecting. That really kind of says it all around this particular principle, but it's one of those things, kind of like in any relationship or any marriage, it takes work, it takes effort, it takes intention to really, keep certain things sacred, so to speak, keep certain things, keeping the trains running on time, keeping the, making sure that there's mutual respect, and really protecting the integrity of that relationship is important, and it does take some effort. So just understanding that. I do want to take a moment to talk about this. This is one of my favorite aspects of this. And I've kind of alluded to it already, but effective collaboration must attend to balancing task, relationship, and maintenance. And tasks is, just as this picture depicts, this is the agenda and getting the work done, getting those boxes checked off. And a relationship, you can't really do this work without having this relationship, without having a relationship with the people that you're working from. And again, as we talked about that intentionality, all of that takes maintenance. You have to check in. You have to see how things are going and take stock and make corrections as needed. So one piece of this that I think is important is when you're trying to balance all of these things is understanding, again, when you know that everybody has a different perspective, everybody has different strengths, different limitations, different personalities, frankly. When you come and you sit around a table, whatever that table looks like, it can even be a clinical, treatment team, you're going to have to balance the different elements of satisfaction around task, relationship, and maintenance, which also can look like, three sides of a triangle. And really trying to balance these three sides is going to help you have a real healthy working relationship. And a relational is just that. This is the relationship aspect. This is, understanding that, you want to minimize conflict as much as possible. You guys just want to simply have a good time and work well together. Some people, especially those with those relationship building strengths, you're going to gravitate to that. And you may be really dissatisfied with the working relationship in a group setting that is that has really poor kind of relationship issues. You may really not like the people you're working with, or may just, they may just be focused on some of these other areas. And so you are really dissatisfied. And so you may, stop going. You may have some apathy. You may not work as hard. You may deprioritize the work. So as a leader in these groups, and even as a member, understanding that people who with relational needs, or people that really is their primary focus, a lot of extroverts may live in this lane. It just really depends. Take stock of those needs, and understand that if you just ignore them, things are going to get derailed. But if you address them, then you can get a lot more work done. Procedural, these are my process people. These are people, I'm one of these people. I want to know what the rules are. I want to know what the expectations are. I want to know how we're going to get there. How we get there, for me, is the journey. It's just as important as what that end result is. For me, the means do not in any way, shape, or form always justify the end. And so that's going to be something that's really important. These are people who will volunteer to be on the bylaws committee to write the bylaws for your group. And so, their needs are equally as important as these other folks. And with any group process, again, you have to have shared expectations. And this is the side of that balance where you can really write out and be intentional about communicating and agreeing on what those shared expectations are. And lastly, substantive. This gets back to the task and to the work of this group. What are you really trying to do? And how does that work? And so folks that are not getting, if you have 5 things on the agenda and you sit down and you've met for an hour or an hour and a half and you've only gotten through items 1 and 2 on the agenda, people who are more oriented to getting the work done and are more kind of those task people, they're going to tend to be really dissatisfied in this kind of environment. And you really want to make sure that you're attending, of course, to the work all the time. But really, by having this balance, it really is. It's going to be a lot easier moving forward. So I'm going to stop there and just see. We're almost to the end, and I got through a little bit of this, but I wanted to stop and see if there are any questions. And as you guys are thinking, if you have any questions, this is a tip. If for any group setting, again, this could be clinical, interagency, any kind of group setting, it's really important to balance these 3 elements of the work. And if you see things that are changing, like there's a change in team dynamics or direction, or all of a sudden you have a new mission to add to your already full plate, or if you notice that there's conflict between group members or apathy, people stop showing up, other conflict or group dysfunction, or you're just simply you're not making much progress, or you think you could be working a lot faster, chances are that one side or all sides of these triangles are really out of balance. And so you can do a really quick poll of your group members. You can do an anonymous survey. You could just have a conversation about it. But this is a really good tool to have in your toolbox for working effectively on teams and groups. So I'm going to stop there at 6:53 and see if there are any other questions. So, are there any questions? Okay, not from Kara. Okay. Well, just to summarize, I really hope that you all will take some time and review the rest of the slides. Again, there's some really good information in the notes section if you can use that view. Also, the guest lecture from week 4 is really, really exceptional. Christina's over all of the she's over clinical excellence for all of Centerstone of America, which is in 4 or 5 states at this point. They're the largest community mental health organization in the country. She's a proud graduate of this program, and there, I know that when you just read PowerPoints, you don't get the full effect of having a recorded lecture or being able to participate in a live lecture, but I think that there's enough there in that lecture as well that I hope that you can get a lot out of. And there's some really great tools for that are more oriented towards management within organizations and really how to create an effective and healthy team culture. And there's a manager's toolkit there, and really, really some good information. So I hope that you enjoy it. And also know that the information, especially for weeks 4, 5, and 6 that I've put in front of you are, this is information that is going out to professionals who are in the field now, who've been in the field for years and years and years. And I'm really excited to be able to put this information in front of you as students, because I feel like if you learn this in an educational setting and you have an opportunity to talk about it and build on it through your internship and your future work, that there's no telling what you can do, because a lot of people are having to wait a long time to get access to this kind of latest and greatest info from the field. So I'm happy to be able to put that in front of you all. So in our last few minutes, are there any questions or comments about the material, or any remaining questions about the assignments or future Zoom sessions or future projects? Okay. Well, as usual, you all are welcome to email me or post anything on the discussion board, and we'll move forward. And I'll be sending out a recording of this session just as soon as I can. So look forward to seeing y'all soon, and I look forward to reading your papers and seeing your projects. Thank you very much.